to
That's your cue. That's your cue. Okay, we're good.
now I've got it. I'm Charles Cohen, and I want to welcome you all to the next installment of Interfaith Intersections, a project of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice, inspired by a similar program called the Children of Abraham that comes out of Dubuque, Iowa. As always, my thanks go to Rabbi Bonnie Margolis, my fellow committee members, especially Mary, who is around here somewhere. Thank you. The Madison area Baha'i community for once again allowing us to broadcast from this lovely space. Sierra Neitzel for her technical expertise, and of course our panelists, whom I will be introducing in a few minutes. The goals of Interfaith Intersections build upon Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice's previous program, Sacred Sites, in which people learned about different religions in situ by going to various places and speaking with people in their different houses of worship. Interfaith Intersections strives for something a little more personal, a little more intimate. It involves community members from different traditions in conversations around specific topics from the perspectives of their different religions. And so we want to project a sense of religions as lived experience rather than as things that are situated in buildings or concretized in a series of doctrines or tenets. In past sessions, we have already heard from at least one Quaker, a Lutheran, a Catholic, practicing and non-practicing Jews, Muslims, Baha'is, a practitioner of nature spirituality, and a Buddhist. Tonight's panel, which will feature the largest number of people that we've ever had, 4 individuals, will bring representatives who will give us perspectives from the Society of Friends, the Baha'i Faith, Islam, and Buddhism. And tonight's topic is forgiveness. Under what circumstances do your traditions, for one thing, tell you to ask for forgiveness from a higher power or ask you to forgive other people? Those are just a couple of ways of beginning to think about this question. Before I go further, let me just mention that we are planning 3 more sessions in the fall. I'll just mention the first on September 12th. The subject will be on High Holy Days, and it will be outside the cozy confines of Madison at the People's United Methodist Church on North Alpine Parkway in Oregon. Later in the fall, there will be sessions on festival calendars and giving thanks, but we'll be putting information out to all of you long before that. The format of our program today is, as always, starting with presentations. Again, we have 4 people, so they'll all speak for 10 minutes. We'll have a little bit shorter question and answer period initially so that we can have time for the breakout sessions. Sierra will manage those online. Probably there will be one group of people online who will go into a chat session. And those of you who are here will divide into small groups and move on from there. The small groups are designed to have free-flowing discussions. They don't have any designated moderators. But there gives everyone a chance to say something that's on their mind, maybe to expand upon what the panelists have already done. Finally, we'll come back for a brief wrap-up, for final thoughts, for evaluations. Those of you who are here should have received a paper copy of one.
I ran out.
Well,
My
they-
printer's in Milwaukee.
okay. Those of you online, please put, Sierra, should they put their evaluations in the chat or email?
Yeah.
Okay, and please let us know if you want to be a panelist. We are definitely in recruiting mode for the fall sessions. And I think as you'll see, the panelists are, have been the real heart of these discussions. They've all done very well. So I want to start allaying fears that people might have about speaking or speaking out of turn. Everyone has done wonderfully. About the presentations, we've asked the panelists to give their thoughts on their tradition's approach to forgiveness. How or from whom we ask forgiveness, how we forgive others, and are there any circumstances in which we should or should not? We've asked each person to interpret this question freely as they wish. And so they can take this discussion wherever they want. And we, as always, each panelist speaks from his or her own understanding of the tradition, but not for the tradition. So we're getting particular viewpoints from within a tradition.
For me, forgiveness is a way of life. The core Quaker faith and practice goes back some 375 years, when a man in England, in deep despair, had a vision that Christ has come to teach his people himself. Everything else is secondary to that seed from God that lives and grows in each of us. It is a matter of experience. But we are responsible individually and in community to listen for God's call and to follow in holy obedience. A saying that startles many hyper-educated Quakers is, do not think, but submit. Our own wishes or habits or emotions or laziness can get in the way of hearing God's calling. That is why I ask myself again and again, am I walking in the light? Is there any unease that I am off course? Quakers have no scripture, but we do have treasured words from the founding generations. Be still and cool in thy own mind and spirit. Give over thy own willing. Love truth and its testimony, whether it be to you or against you. And we are written in one another's heart. Dearest to me in hard times, and forgiveness can be hard, is this. Art thou in the darkness? Mind it not, for if thou dost, it will feed thee more. But stand still and act not, and wait in patience, till light arises out of darkness and leads thee. The inner light that comes from God illuminates our humanity in all its messy wholeness. That's where love of truth comes in. We humbly accept correction, recognizing that we share the same ability to fall into error as the best and the worst of us. We ask to be forgiven. Granting forgiveness seems to get the most attention these days, with the goal of benefit for the forgiver. But forgiving because it's good for us is self-centered. It can become self-righteous, ignoring our own need to be forgiven for hurts great or small. Forgiveness is not a solo sport, nor does it involve a team. Forgiveness is a flow between two people as one asks or offers forgiveness with the other. Both directions matter. In my experience, asking forgiveness enlightens the heart far more or more deeply than granting forgiveness. And forgiving means more when we have ourselves asked to be forgiven. How can we know what we're offering if we've never recognized our own need for forgiveness? If we're lucky, that need has been answered. But even if we have never been forgiven, recognizing that we too have wronged others places us firmly in the human community. It's no accident that in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us comes first, or as we forgive, or that the holiest day in Judaism centers on effective repentance, in which self-examination leads both to seeking forgiveness and to offering practical repair of harm. Forgiveness can take time, but it lasts. It took me 10 years from the first determination to ask my mother to forgive me for all the pain I had caused in my growing up. I kept putting it off, so embarrassing. But when the day came, I had steeled myself for a long list of all my transgressions. I expected to hear, of course I forgive you for this and this and this and this. Instead, in silence, my mother simply passed her hand over my head in blessing. For the next 10 years, until she died, my mother and I lived in the simplicity of that loving forgiveness. There were no barriers between us. If a new hurt occurred, it could be recognized and healed at once. My older sisters were not so fortunate. Having avoided opening the paths of forgiveness, they coped with our mother's death out of unhealed wounds. One in resentful fury saying, "We have just buried the most evil person I know," and the other in painful regret, "Did she know I love her? Did she know?" A parent can ask a child's forgiveness too, or refuse to ask. When she was only 17, I helped my daughter find a job and move away from home to get her away from an emotionally abusive father before he did further damage to her mental health. Over the next few years, my daughter and I reconnected as whole and loving adults, able to talk about the good and the bad, past and present. Soon enough, I could ask my daughter to forgive me for not protecting her better during my years of depression. We'd already talked through it and were at peace with each other, but I felt it important to ask for her forgiveness openly and in words. Her, of course, came easily, but my asking mattered. As our daughter rebuilt her life, she sometimes wrote to her father, wanting him to acknowledge the harm so that they might find reconciliation. But he never even opened the letters. He refused to come to her wedding, saying, "I don't think I would enjoy it." Eventually, my daughter told me that she had forgiven her father on her own without his response. "He will never know forgiveness," she said, "because he will never admit how badly he treated me, but I don't need to live with the pain." This perhaps is not so much forgiveness as its close cousin, letting go, but that also matters. And sometimes guilt is undeserved, and sometimes there is nothing to forgive. Once when we were in our 40s, my sister called me in the middle of the night, crying, asking my forgiveness. A complicated story of a rape when she was 5 or 6 and I was 3 or 4. She had tried to deflect what was coming by saying to the man, a war-damaged soldier, "If this is going to be so nice, shouldn't the baby go first?" "Can you ever forgive me," my sister asked, "for trying to push him on to you?" "There's nothing to forgive," I said. "You were a child trying to survive." 2 months later, my sister died. With forgiveness, she had lost a lifelong burden. And I had an explanation for a lifetime of jumbled, scary non-memories. Forgiveness is what matters. Nothing in it can be taken for granted. We are always free to accept, reject, or ignore forgiveness. The two people need not even be in communication. One of them might be dead or unreachably distant, but the other can still ask forgiveness, can still grant forgiveness. Some time ago, a friend in hospice was still trying to forgive his terribly abusive father, but could not reach that. The irresolution was disturbing the peace of his dying. I wrote him a few snippet poems of reassurance. When he railed at still hurting so much, I offered this. "Who gives the past this power? Have I not climbed and climbed and climbed out of the past and into life and light? Why me? Why now again? But there is no reason, so I find another question." And when he despaired of forgiveness, I said, in his voice, "Let God forgive him. I cannot. God alone knows how. But that is where I find forgiveness. It is not God alone, but God in me." And to put that reassurance another way, I added this. God will take the will for the deed.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Abdullah, as Charlie said, and I'm not a religious scholar. I'm just a technical person, but I will be talking about Islam from my own perspective, from my own knowledge, from my own skill that I have in Islam. So as the subject or the topic of this meeting is forgiveness from God and forgiveness from person to person, So in Islam, we also have two types of forgiveness. Allah's forgiveness to human, God's forgiveness to human, and human to human, or person to person. I'm going to explain all these two in a bit more in detail. So I have some examples, some verses of from the Quran, but they are translated into English. I will try to read the English, not the Arabic, or try. So a few facts about the mercy of Allah, or God, and forgiveness from the Allah. In Islam, we have 99 names for Allah. So 98 names of Allah is like objective, and Allah is his personal or main name, Allah. So the two names of Allah is Al-Ghafur and Al-Afwa. Al-Ghafur, all forgiving. This means all forgiving, or He is the powerful of forgiving. That's one meaning of Al-Ghafur. And then Afwa is the same. He forgets everything. These are the two names of Allah in Islam about forgiveness. And then about mercy, we have like 348 times appearance of mercy of Allah in the Quran. And the word of forgiveness has been mentioned in the Quran from 100 to 200 times. There are like several or lots of verses in the Quran that is talking about forgiveness of Allah and forgiveness from person to person. And I will not bring all of them here, but as an example, I'm going to read a few of them here. So we all have some kind of an understanding of forgiveness of Allah and forgiveness from person to person. So the first ayah or the first verses that I can read is from chapter or Surah Al-Zumar, ayah verses 53. It says to his messenger Muhammad, "Hey Muhammad, tell to my servant who have exceeded the limits against your soul, do not lose hope in Allah's mercy. Allah certainly forgives all sins. He is indeed the all forgiving, most merciful." So we might have some people in the community and in the villages, in the family, that they are like full of sin, or I'm full of sin. Maybe God will not forgive me. But Allah said, do not lose hope on Allah, on the God. Ask forgiveness. And the second verse that I can read is, "Inna Allah yuhibbut tawabin wa yuhibbul mutatahhirin." It says that indeed Allah loves those who are constantly repentant and loves those who purify themselves. Like after each sin, they're trying to ask forgiveness from Allah or from God. But we have some people that are doing sin and sin and sin, and they don't care about Allah and not asking for forgiveness, and that's not. So if someone like do a sin and then asking Allah for forgiveness, Allah or God is always there to forgive them. And the other verses that I have in my paper is, I'm going to do the English version of that. "And whoever does a wrong or wrong things, but then seeks forgiveness of Allah, will find Allah forgiving him, and He's merciful." That was like three examples of forgiveness from Allah. And then in Islam, we have like all deeds are counted or judged based on our intention. So that means if we have, our intention is to ask Allah for forgiveness, we have to do like sincerely that. It doesn't mean that we have to play a game with Allah, but we have something in our heart and ask Allah to forgive us, and then we do like that sin again and again. But if you do like sincerely that, Allah will forgive you always and always and always. And then human to human forgiveness. In Islam, it's always best to forgive people. Why? Because Allah said, when you forgive, I will forgive you. And then I'm going to talk about like one thing more here. The righteous people or the righteous person in Islam. One of the characteristic or sign of the righteous people or righteous person is that he or she forget. So there are like 8 characteristic or signs of a righteous people. I'm going to walk through them briefly. One of them is that they forget. Okay, the first sign of a righteous person is that he believes on unseen. They believe on someone that we believe on God. We didn't see him, we didn't meet him yet. And the second sign of a righteous person is that he or she or they performing prayers. The third sign of a righteous person is that they are donating from what Allah gave them. They give in charity from what Allah gave them. The fourth sign or characteristic of a righteous person is that they believe on what we revealed on you, Muhammad, and what we revealed before you, Muhammad, on other prophets.
We began to have technical difficulties, so this video will now jump ahead to the next portion.
All right, so I was mentioning that I grew up Episcopalian and came from what I would consider a pretty Christian background, not necessarily evangelical, but Episcopalians like to say we're Catholic light. So when I went to college, I studied drama and specifically writing and teaching musical theater. And while I was at university, I had a chance to go and see the Broadway production of Jane Eyre. So Jane Eyre, for those of you who read it, my guess is you probably have not seen the musical. It wasn't on Broadway very long. Jane is a Christian woman, and she really struggles with a lot of things in her life. And early on in the show, her caregiver in the orphanage sings this beautiful song for her called Forgiveness. So I thought I would play the song. You can listen to, I pretty much agreed with everything that's said in the song. And then we're going to kind of go on the journey of looking through the song and seeing how maybe my mindset has shifted now that I'm a Baha'i. So this song again is called Forgiveness from the musical Jane Eyre. It's written by Paul Gordon. Let's hope technology works with us. You can be wonderful. You have to be strong to overcome evil. Return back to Lord. We must not hope for rush. I'm not And then it starts repeating and goes into a different spot. So let me unplug. And come back for two. All right, so morning song. Yeah. It's beautiful. And I would say most of that, I absolutely still believe. But in graduate school, so sorry, I'm trying to get to another note. In graduate school, I went to graduate school in Evanston, Illinois, and some of you may know the Temple for North America for the Baha'i Faith is in Evanston. And because of that, and because the National Center is there, a lot of young adults go and give like a year of service. So I got plugged in to the Baha'i community there through some friends, and I started learning about the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And one thing that I learned very early on was this notion of bringing myself to account each day. So this really means like on a daily basis, we're looking at the things that we've done, the good things that we've done, and also our shortcomings. So presuming that we're a person of faith and we're reflecting on our day, we're looking at, did I get closer to God today? Or did I do something that have maybe pulled me away? Have I done God's will? Am I developing godly attributes? So God has given us this opportunity, bringing ourselves to account each day is this opportunity to acknowledge where we need forgiveness, that we need forgiveness, and more importantly, that we need to ask for it. So I learned about this, but I didn't become a Baha'i, not at the time. I moved to Los Angeles and I joined a kind of evangelical Christian church, and there was a study, and the leader of the study was telling us that Jesus died for our sins, so we're all good. No matter what we do, we're good. And I said, oh, we still have to bring ourselves to account each day, right? I mean, it's for our own progress so that we can recognize our sins and try not to do them again. Jesus forgave us, but we have to turn daily and receive that forgiveness from God. And he goes, no, we're forgiven. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'm more of a Baha'i than I think. So I went back and studying the faith. So now I've been a Baha'i for 19 years. And I would say my understanding of forgiveness is probably not much more than it was then. And that's mainly because I've done a lot of reading and it's complicated. The concept of forgiveness is so multifaceted. So I have a bunch of notes. I may follow some of them, but what I really want to do is go through these lyrics and see where those lyrics, where the concepts in that song are maybe a little different in my head now. So she starts out saying, you mustn't be revengeful. You have to be strong. Absolutely, that is a teaching of the Baha'i faith. We do not take revenge. We love, we forgive. So that's not different. We have to be strong, yes, and God gives us strength to offer good for evil and return right for wrong. Absolutely. Absolutely. We are urged When someone does something that may cause hurt or pain, it's not just forgiving, but lifting them up, elevating them. And one concept that helps us to do this is the concept of overlooking each other's faults. Doesn't mean forgiveness is easy. It just means this is something that we need to work at, and it makes forgiveness maybe, well, if we look at a person and we see God in them, and we see their godly attributes, these are points that we love. We love God. We love God in this person. And we forgive these things that are on the outside because of and for the sake of God in that individual. So we offer good for evil and we return right for wrong. It says you must not hold a grudge, and we must learn to endure. Absolutely, don't hold a grudge. But here's an even more complicated thing that we are given in the guidance as Baha'is. Do not be offended. Do not be offended by what people may do. The quote, I would quote, it says, "Let not your heart be offended with anyone. If someone commits an error and wrong toward you, you must instantly forgive him. So let your heart not be offended." Also, we're asked to not be angered by anyone and to be a true and loving friend to all. All. Not just those who agree with us and not just those who do right by us. We're not to be offended. And along with that is the notion that we must do our very best not to offend others. So in a short way, we're kind of saying, don't do stuff that's going to require you to ask for forgiveness. So all of these concepts mixed together, if we apply them, this is huge. So if none of us were offended by what anyone else did or said, and if we never got angry at another person, and we didn't do anything that offended others, we wouldn't be having this panel. Right? We'd all be like, I'm good, and she's good, and he's good, and like, great. But we're not there yet, right? Too bad. Humanity is not at that point. And we're far from perfect. We do get offended, and we offend others. And I would dare to say that some people like offending, and some people enjoy being offended. We as a culture don't seem ready to give up our offenses and anger. So we still need to learn how to be more forgiving, which is a skill. This is an attribute of God. As in Islam, there's many names for God: the forgiver, the all-forgiving, the ever-forgiving, he whom we turn to for remission of our failings, O thou forgiving Lord. And we are told that our whole lives are set on this path of learning to develop godly attributes. And one of these attributes is being forgiving, is learning to forgive. So we develop that skill. And how do we do that? By seeing this beauty of God in another person, by acting on that beauty, by raising people up and seeing the best in them, by overlooking faults. So I'm going to give you a personal example, because we were encouraged to do that. This doesn't mean that I'm good at forgiveness, but a friend and I were working on writing a musical theater project. And without going into too many details, I'll just say that there were some expectations for the project that were not communicated, and they led to some really tense conversations and almost the end of our collaboration. We both stepped away for a bit and really assessed our friendship. And I thought about all of the positive characteristics that attracted me to her as a friend in the first place. And the one thing I kept coming back to was the knowledge that she, who is a person of very strong faith, that she works really hard to be a good person. She is working very hard to be a person of God. And I have seen God in her so many times. And I knew that she was working on forgiving me at the same time. So there's something very powerful in understanding that and this connection. So here's a point of unity, the point where God sees God in the other. So both of us are in our feeble way are doing our darndest to act in accordance with God's will for us. Now, I don't know if you remember, part of that quote says, if someone commits an error, you must instantly forgive him. Instantly. So that's not my forgiveness capacity in this situation. It took me about 6 months. But like I said, in the Baha'i faith, we are learning this pervading concept that we are learning all the time, and our capacity grows. So today I'm more forgiving than yesterday. Life is this continual path of learning, which brings me to forgiving ourselves. It's all tied to this concept of bringing ourselves to account each day. And if we're truly trying to become better people each and every day, then we can see our shortcomings and we can hopefully take the action to move forward. But really what's more important is the turning to God. God is the ever forgiving. God's forgiveness is always there. But if we don't open ourselves up to it, we cannot receive it. So one of the metaphors I've heard that I really like is the metaphor of a thirsty person walking in the rain. So the rain's coming down, the water is there, and you're going, I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty. Well, look up, open your mouth, or put your hands together and collect the water. But you have to take action to receive that bounty. So this is how we get forgiveness from God. We give forgiveness to each other, and we forgive ourselves knowing we are on this path of learning. There's two different, okay. That's enough. I didn't think I was gonna reach 10 minutes. So the two last things I just want to mention and I'll cut them quick and I won't read. New things that I saw in the Baha'i faith is that forgiveness is from God and forgiving to each other. And if someone does something, we can forgive them. But if they're breaking the law, it's not the legal system's place to forgive. It's their place to enact justice so that person will learn and society will learn. And then the other thing is also within the Baha'i faith, we do not have confession or the forgiveness of sins from clergy. So the forgiveness of sins, the absolution of sins, forgiveness from God is only from God. So I thought I would tell you the new lyrics. Is that okay? Okay. So the new lyrics. You mustn't be revengeful. You have to be strong to offer good for evil, return right for wrong. We must not take offense, and we must not offend. We know God will forgive, but we must turn to Him. Forgiveness is loving and good. Forgiveness is learned in time, and it's something we should. When they bruise you with words, when they make you feel small, when it's hardest to bear, lift them up to feel tall. Forgiveness we must ask for each day. Forgiveness, we know our faults, then others give way. Bless those souls who would curse your name when the last bell tolls. Did you relieve their pain? You can continue to grieve, but know the gospel is true. You must forgive those who lie and bless them that curse you. I can't sing it all, so not many songs here, but I do have a story. And I wonder if you have heard the story about the two Tibetan monks that ran into each other after not seeing each other for many years. They had both been in prison and were tortured by their captors. So the first monk says to the second one, "Have you forgiven your captors?" And the monk said, "Never, never, I shall never forgive them." And the other monk said, "Well then, they still have you in prison." So if you know anything about Buddhism, you know that Buddhism is obsessed with suffering. It's talked about constantly. And the main aim is to relieve the suffering in our lives and in the lives of other people. And forgiveness is one way to do that. A long time ago, Buddhism taught that there were 5 unforgivable actions: killing your mother, killing your father, killing an arhat, which is an enlightened person, injuring a Buddha, or causing disunity among the Buddhist order. Now, I think we know that most religions change over time. Future generations will edit or embellish the teachings of the original founder. And when missionaries export religions to other countries, they often tweak them to suit the culture they're trying to get interested in. And as far as I know, modern Buddhism doesn't teach the 5 unforgivables anymore. The position now is that any act can be forgiven and should be forgiven. I'm sorry, that's wrong. When forgiveness is difficult, what we often have to do is separate the actor from the action. We may not be able to forgive the act, but we can forgive the actor. And that's very important when people experience some sort of horrific harm from another, where it seems like it's unforgettable. I want to read a quote from George Floyd's sister, because it encompasses all the things that Buddhism teaches about forgiveness. This is something that she said on television on one of the Fox News channels. She said, "America might think I'm crazy for saying that, but I have to get it off my chest. At this point, 3 years down the line, I do forgive Derek Chauvin for what he did. It's not okay that he did it, okay? But I have to forgive him in order to move on with my life. I have been running around in circles. I have been going through a lot. I can't keep living my life with anger that's going to turn into hate, such as he had. I can't live with that in me. So I pray for him, and I pray that he finds peace within himself. I pray that next time he's kneeling down to help someone up and not to hold them down. God has a plan for everybody. I pray for you, Derek, and I forgive you. If you are listening, may the peace of God be with you, man." So she found a way by blessing him and praying for him to forgive him. To share a personal story, I found a similar way to forgiveness in regards to something very difficult. When I was 19, I was grabbed off the street and I experienced a violent sexual assault
And the person intended to also end my life, but he was interrupted and I survived. So I would have nightmares about the attack for a number of years, waking up screaming in the middle of the night, not knowing where I was or what was happening for a few minutes. During that time, if someone had suggested that I forgive that person who had attacked me, I would have laughed in their face. I only wished that I could somehow make him suffer the way he had made me suffer and the way I continued to suffer. 2 years later, I began to study Oriental medicine with a teacher who was also a practicing Buddhist. Back then, there weren't very many acupuncture schools. You had to apprentice with somebody, and he had invited 5 people to study with him in his home, and I was one of them. He required everyone to sit in silent meditation before he started lecturing. And I didn't know what meditation was, didn't want to do it, didn't want to have somebody, as I saw it, kind of pushing their religion on me. So I would hang around outside the front door till they were done meditating, and then I would go in. Well, one day the weather was pretty bad and rainy, and I thought, what the heck, I'm going to go in. And so I sat and meditated, and I have been meditating ever since. And learning principles about Buddhism. The Buddha said, we must forgive all those who have harmed us, but first we have to let go of the anger we feel towards them. And my teacher at that time said, holding on to that anger is like holding a red hot coal in the palm of your hand, and it hurts nobody except you. That made a big impression on me, and I decided I needed to find a way to forgive the person who had attacked me. So I would silently forgive him every time I sat down to meditate. I knew that he had acted out of confusion and ignorance. And it was a long time before I stopped wishing him harm. But eventually I stopped wishing that and started to bless him in my mind. And when I think of him now, it's more with pity because I have a feeling he's probably in prison. Another thing I would like to share, I don't know what's wrong with my voice tonight, was my first marriage was difficult. I thought I was marrying a wonderful person, but he turned out to be controlling and was a classic domestic abuser. After I divorced him, it got worse because he discovered the joys of litigation and used the court system and law enforcement to harass me. For example, one time I took my daughter out of school for a dental appointment. He called the police claiming I had kidnapped her. So I had to deal with police and courts. He would file motion after motion, alleging somehow I violated joint custody. This went on for 10 years. I went thousands and thousands of dollars into debt, paying attorneys. And my health was pretty much ruined. But worse, I was a cesspool of anger and resentment and entertained fantasies of revenge. I didn't really want to hurt him. I just wanted to burn his house down. And I knew exactly how I would do it. That's how bad it was. But eventually, when it all stopped, when I finally got a good attorney, this brilliant, aggressive attorney from New York City who showed up, who was outraged at what I had been going through, he put an end to all the legal harassment with one very loud phone call and one very strong letter, and it was over. But I was still suffering because I couldn't stop thinking about the things that he had done and I couldn't find any peace. So eventually, using some tools from Buddhism, I started to work on trying to forgive him in meditation. And I developed a little affirmation of my own, which I stole a line from Fiddler on the Roof. There's a place where the villagers say, "Rabbi, Rabbi, is there a prayer for the Tsar?" Maybe you know what they say. And the rabbi said, "May God bless the Tsar and keep him far away from us." So I would say, "May God bless my ex's name and keep him far away from me." And that worked for quite a while. As I got deeper into Buddhism, I realized that often the person or people who hurt us the most are our greatest teachers. And I realized how much I learned from my ex and the experience with him. In fact, I eventually became a domestic violence educator and worked with health professionals, teaching them how to identify patients who are suffering from domestic violence and teaching them how to do interventions which were empowering. And I volunteered in the court system when women were, on the day women came to get protection orders, mostly women, and worked with the shelter. So all of that work was very rewarding. I never would have gone down that path if it hadn't been for him and my experiences. And I know that there are a lot of people in the world who have suffered much, much worse than whatever I went through. People who have been in war, people who have been in prison, people who have lost children to school shooters, could go on and on. And for them, it may feel like they have experienced the unforgivable. And I would really like to go deeply into that topic, but there really isn't time. So I brought an article. Also, I can't teach something without bringing handouts. It's like going to a potluck with no food. So I brought a couple handouts, and they're backed by the name badges. One of them is called Forgiving the Unforgivable. And if you are carrying something in your heart that you feel you can't forgive, or you know someone like that, I think this article would be very helpful for you. It's from a Buddhist point of view. And there's also an article that describes the Buddhist spiritual practice of forgiveness, which I'm going to describe very briefly. But if you decide you want to try it at home, you can take the other handout and try it. Buddhism has made a psychological study of forgiveness, and they go about it. Buddhism goes about it in a very sort of scientific way, what works. And basically, in a nutshell, it's when you have angry thoughts towards someone, it's about reversing those thoughts and repeating it over and over. You're basically brainwashing yourself in a different way to think about the situation differently. So in Buddhism, there is no God to ask for forgiveness from. There are enlightened beings that people pray to and receive help from, but there's not a God in a sense of some other religions to pray to ask for forgiveness. So this three-part Buddhist meditation for forgiveness involves first forgiving oneself for harm we may have caused ourselves, knowingly or unknowingly, whether in thoughts, words, or deeds. And then forgiving others we may have harmed. Asking forgiveness from others we may have harmed, knowingly or unknowingly. And lastly, the hardest one of all is offering forgiveness to those who have harmed us. And if you reflect on this and make a list of people you feel you need to forgive, I recommend creating two categories. one for the easier people, the ones that you love and care about, that you could possibly see yourself forgiving at some point. And another category for those that you think you could probably never forgive them, maybe even people that you hate because of what they did. And start with the first easier category. What people do is repeat a phrase of forgiveness with the person's name and repeat it several times before moving on to the next part of the meditation. And if you try this, you may feel insincere at first. You may feel a lot of confusion, fear, anger, rage. You may even feel like you're an imposter, like you're saying you're forgiving someone, but in your heart, you know you're really not, at least not yet. But that doesn't matter. You should just say the words of forgiveness anyway. As long as you hold on to your intention of eventually sincerely forgiving, you will make progress. And that progress will come by degrees, slowly. It takes repetition. It takes time. That's why it's called a practice. Thank you.
In the room, I have a sense of tremendous energy and also sort of sense of, wow, these have been exceptional presentations. So before we go any farther, can we just give a collective round of applause? Because we had a larger panel than usual, we're not going to be able to do both a question and answer and a group discussion. So I'd like to get a sense from both those of you online and those here. How many of you have questions or comments that you would like to make to or with the panelists? Sure. Yeah. Oh, okay. Before, so, all right. So, and online. No, I said anything. Okay. Well, then I'll let you. We've got one comment, and then we'll break into groups.
I am mostly attracted to how all of you laid out the learning process that's engaged and involved in forgiveness itself as a concept, as a practice. That's mainly the comment I want to make is the learning curve is steep, long, and necessary for our own good.
Very nice. Thank you. All right, again, because of time and because we have a large group, I'm going to change the process a little bit. We usually count off and get people to move around, but I want to maximize the time we have for talking. So I'll let Sierra do what we have to wrap everything up. Is there anyone who would like to share something from what your group was talking about? And that includes people online as well? Anyone who has a final, would like to offer a final comment? Yeah.
I think our group really talked about that, you know, there's an individual attempt to forgive, but there's also global attempts to forgive, and both are very difficult. And we were just musing about how you might do that. And we talked about how to learn how to forgive yourself first is really important. And so if you could, translate that to a global level too, maybe we'll get somewhere in world peace.
Thank you. Anyone online? Anyone from the panel? We had our own couple of conversations.
I was just so impressed. I was so impressed by the heartwarming, truthful talking by the people tonight. And they were so close, and you shared it with others. That's great of you to do. And I empathize with you.
Thank you. Brave indeed. Personal, very well said. Last call? Okay, well then I think we should all join again in thanking our panelists, our participants for their candor, their empathy, and their courage as well. Let's give them one more.
As always, for moderating, and to the Baha'i Center for hosting us again so warmly. It's always wonderful to be here.
And don't forget, Jason,
They have the trees.
Oh,
yeah.
Please fill out the evaluations or those of you online, send.
Email them out.
Oh, okay. Bonnie will email them out to those of you online. Thank you for joining us.
Bye, everyone. And thank you.
yes, thank you, Mary. Oh, yeah, that's